here to talk about the first solo Wolverine story. And if you thought it was Frank Miller, you were wrong. So I graduated high school in 1985, and I wanted to be a comic book artist. At that time, none of the art schools were teaching anybody how to draw comic books. You had to go through this apprentice system. Still, it was in use up since the 40s. You would beg and plead a comic book artist, show them, and then you would become their assistant. And it really wouldn't help you, because why would they want competition? Anyway, so graduated high school, I was going to be a comic book artist. Didn't know how to do it. I was walking through Greenwich Village. I saw a flyer in the phone booth that said, Ken Landgraf, comic book art. He was teaching out of his studio how to draw comic books. I said, this is it. This is the moment that life is going to change. And here we are with Ken.
I'll talk a bit about how I got into Marvel Comics. When I came to New York City, all the old World War II boys were still drawing the comics, like Kirby, Gil Kane. Can you guys hear me? Okay, and what was happening was they weren't really hiring young kids at this time. I think in a 10-year period, only 10 artists were hired. I just got lucky, I was one of them. And what I did was, as soon as I got into New York, I took my portfolio and I stayed across the street at the Marvel offices. And I had collected photographs of all the Marvel editors and writers and artists, so I knew what they looked like. So they'd have like little bios sometimes in a Marvel comic, and they'd show Stan Lee, or they'd show Jack Kirby, or John Buscema, or Dick Cole. So I knew exactly how these guys were going to look when they came out for lunchtime. So I had just gotten out of the military too. I had served in Vietnam, and when I got to New York, I had the GI Bill, so I was going to school of visual arts for a while. And what happened was I just stayed out in front of Marvel until Stan Lee came out.
Stalker.
And across the street. So I made it look like I was coming up the street. Because you got to do stuff like this. How are you going to get in there? They wouldn't let you come in the Marvel offices. So I said, "Are you Stan Lee?" He said, "Yes, I was since this morning. He was making jokes." And he said, I said, "Can I show you my portfolio?" He said, "No, I'm going to lunch. But you can go up to Marvel offices and tell the secretary that you want to see John Romita, and I said he could look at your work." So, I mean, I was shocked. I was stunned. All of a sudden, I'm up in front of the secretary, and she called, "John Romita, somebody's here to see you." I don't know if any of you had experience with anything like that back in the early 70s, but you could not get into those comic companies. And if you didn't show your work, you could never draw the comics because they wouldn't know who you were. And what happened was Romita came and basically told me I had to learn how to draw women better. The anatomy wasn't very good, but he saw something in it that he like went over the stuff and showed me a couple things like how to do some anatomy. And the best thing that happened was he took me over to Marie Severin, who was John Severin's sister. She was the head colorist, and she could draw. And she like took me under her wing. For some reason, she liked me. And she said, "Whenever you do new sample pages, come up to Marvel and say you want to see Marie." So I did that for a year because I wasn't good enough yet. I didn't even know what the artwork looked like. There was no, like a fanzine thing, if you had it, it was inked already, right? So what happened was she gave me photocopies of Gil Kane's work and John Buscema. I've never seen this stuff. What did the pencil look like?
So what you would see is you would see like sketches, not very tight renderings of comic book art, and you realize that's where the knowledge for anatomy, perspective, and everything came in. So you had to learn on your own, again, no art school.
Yeah, there was no way of really learning this. What happened was I was going to school of visual arts and I had Kurtzman and Eisner as teachers. I wasn't supposed to be in the second year and third year classes, but I figured I already had spent time in Vietnam for 2 years. So I just went to the principal and I said, "Look, if I get permission, from Eisner encouragement, can I go in second and third year classes? So that's how I ended up in there. So otherwise I was going to waste, like, you know, taking 101 photography or 101 sketch class. And what happened was Gil Kane came into the class as a guest artist, and he was drawing Spider-Man at the time, and he had drawn Green Lantern. He was like the master of anatomy. So when he left the class, I ran after him. I just left the school, ran after him, and I told him I wanted to be his assistant. He just said to me, "My boy, come up to Marvel on Friday." I mean, I couldn't believe my luck. So what happened is I went up to Marvel on Friday, and he says, "Here's the Conan the Barbarian book. I'm going to be drawing Conan for 2 issues. Read the book and break it down what the pictures are going to be." I couldn't even draw, basically. You know, it's just like anybody coming up there, like, you know, with very basic knowledge of the figure. I didn't really know what perspective was. Kane would show me this stuff after a while. And so what I did is I just broke down the story really quickly for him. And he only did that because he could speed up the work. He didn't want to sit there reading the Conan novels. You know, these guys, they had to make money. Okay, they got to turn these pages out. You're paid like $50. You know, the top genius in the field was getting $50 for a page.
It's not that much more now.
No, it wasn't very good money back then. We were talking about Kirby or John Buscema getting that kind of money. So any way they could speed up the work, they would do that. So I basically told him I didn't need to get paid. He paid me the first time, he gave me $50. And I knew you could get like a family, get like a house, all this kind of stuff. You know, I was just a punk kid. I didn't even need the money. I had the GI Bill.
Is that why you didn't pay me either?
What's that?
Is that why you didn't pay me either?
That's exactly right. That's right. None of these guys, if you were an assistant, you weren't getting paid, by the way, usually. Because these guys weren't making enough money on the pages.
No. If you break it down to the research, and breaking it down and doing all the prep work for it, you're making less than minimum wage.
That's right.
And I think, and everybody's super talented now. I love comic book art, and I'm still an aspiring comic book artist. But nowadays, when everybody's working digitally, you got somebody doing pencils and inks and colors, still getting paid the same rate. Anyway, tell us about what we have here in the Streaming Guide.
Okay,
New to the Outlaws, Starfighters, and Galaxy Rangers.
Yeah, I was one of the first artists to do self-publishing. I had seen Stranko do it. He had left Marvel at this point after getting in a fight with Stanley over a horror story. He wanted to make any changes. And it was a horror story, basically. And he left and started Super Graphics and all these different publications. And he did the history of the comic books. It was a big-sized thing. So I basically thought, well, that's the way to go. Stranko's to be. So I started self-publishing. At the time, Elf Press Novels comics were coming out. And I could go up to like continuity, like I became friends with Neil Adams, so he actually painted the cover of Starfighters #2. I penciled it, but Neil colored and inked it. And I had done the New York City Outlaws later, because you could actually print your own comic books in the 70s and 80s. And there was like 1,000 comic book distributors, stores. You could actually make more money doing your own comic book. That situation's long gone now. The stores don't exist. And so I did a lot of independent publishing. And then the Galaxy Rangers, I had gotten the storyboards for G.I. Joe that Gil Kane did, and I studied the heck out of them. So when I tried out for the Galaxy Rangers, they picked me right away as a storyboard artist. And it was so weird at that time to speed this up. I didn't know what a fax machine was. And they were able to take the drawings and fax them to Japan for approval. I thought they were making fun of me, to tell you the truth. They said about a half hour from now, this is going to be in Japan. So that was it with that self-publishing, and then
So you did Kickstarter crowdfunding before it existed. Again, another pioneering move by Ken Landgraf.
And the other stuff over there is comic book work. I started getting work at DC before even though I was going up to Marvel. I was going up there for a year. I still wasn't good enough. And what I did is I started going to DC, and I had improved, so they hired me right away. And they gave me Hawkman, and and they also gave me Nightman Flamebird, which was Superman's world in the Candor bottles. So that was a big break, and they also gave me this weird story, which is worth a lot of money right now. It's Primate Nazi Gorillas. Yeah, Primate Patrol. So that was right up my alley because I liked World War II. My dad had been in the D-Day invasion, and I loved all the World War II stuff. So I knocked myself out on that job. It was really funny too because it was weird.
Who doesn't love monkey gorillas?
Gorillas. And so that was some of the stuff I did at DC. And then I finally went back to Marvel. And what happened at Marvel, I met with Jim Shooter, and he said, yeah, we'd like to give you some work. We saw your work at DC. And he said, so do you want to draw the Wolverine? Now, that was a real loser character at the time. There was hardly any reference on him. So they gave me, Shooter gave me a plot. He said that Wolverine's going to go into a bar. He invented that, Shooter.
Right, that's the first time that we see the trope of Wolverine hanging out in a bar. I don't know how he can get drunk with that super healing factor, but that's not my word. But yeah, you were the first one to draw Wolverine in a bar.
Yes.
And Shooter just said, okay, Wolverine walks into a bar and he gets into a fight with Hercules. Go.
That was basically what it was a plot. And what later would happen is I would be given the plot and what notes on the pages, like if you see the early Kirby stuff, you can see notes or Jim Cohen was saying this panel, this is what's happening. So you're basically telling the story in the camera shots, and the writer's going to take this and like a lot of you guys could probably be writers because if you gave me the plot and I drew it, you look at the page and then you come up with the dialogue. That was a brilliant way of work. Stan Lee created that. You know, like they're always like saying things about Stan didn't do this or I wrote the story. It's not really true in a way because you have to make that dialogue. I couldn't write funny stuff like Stan Lee came up with. And all those weird nicknames he gave everybody. So what happened was Mary Jo Duffy was given the job, which was unusual because there weren't any female writers up there. It was her and I think Linda Fight from that Beware of the Cat comic. So she ended up writing it. Now, what happened was they sent it over to England, which I didn't know about. This is the only reason this is important. And they printed it in England first before it even hit America, like a year before or something, right?
Right. I was aware of that story. It was printed in a giant size, treasury size Hulk comic book. Wolverine and Hulk, of course, forever connected, but that was a backup story, a bunch of reprints, and I had you sign it like in 1989 or something. But it was recently rediscovered that the original run of that story was in an appearance of a British Marvel comic book, which is worth quite a few $100 if you're lucky enough to have it. I don't think the treasury is worth that.
No, they keep reprinting that. I've gotten paid around 30 times now. Because they reprinted, they just did it in that giant omnibus book. And they don't even tell you, they just send the check out of the blue. And it's not that much because it's only 6 pages.
I wouldn't complain that much about getting checks out of the book.
Well, it's pretty nice.
Yeah.
So what we have here is the comic book printed in England with a John Buscema cover that was never reprinted. He drew that for the British comics. And so it was in black and white. And now Prez inked this. George Prez wasn't famous yet, he was nobody.
Probably just like first comic book work, right?
Yes. So he saw my pencils up there and he asked if he could ink it because I worked so hard I was afraid that I wasn't going to get a job again. So they were almost like etched in tight pencil. With no mistakes, I looked up all the anatomy in the Vern Hogarth books. I looked at all the other artists. I looked at Wally Wood for the lighting. I looked at the drapery. I wouldn't even put down a line unless I looked up how Gil came through it. So I put everything in there I could. And so Prez became the inker on it. And the funny thing about it is, it only says Duffy and Landgraf. There's no credit for Prez on it. Because in England, they didn't, I guess they didn't know who anybody was.
I guess they don't care about inkers.
What's that?
I guess they don't care about inkers.
I don't know, but it was so weird because Prez added so much to this story. In fact, there we have the letter from Marvel. Mike Washburn, he's like a comic historian, a big Wolverine fan. What he ended up doing was writing Marvel letters and telling them that this was first printed in England. So it's not what that Landgraf threw the first story. So this actually resurrected my career because Marvel wrote a letter to me and now it's correctly in all their history.
So you're officially certified as the first solo Wolverine artist.
And it was just stupid luck. I don't know what to say. And
well,
nobody knows
doing
that.
Panels at all these conventions and meeting your fans.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah.
So there's the official Marvel paper they sent acknowledging it. And also now here we have photographs of everybody that was involved in this. We have Jim Shooter. And he was real tall, by the way. He was real scary coming into his office because he was like 6'4" or something. So he's very intimidating and a very dynamic person. And then we have George Perez with his beard. And then we have Mary Jo Duffy, the writer, at the end there.
So like you mentioned, she added the dialogue.
Yes.
After you submitted the pencil.
Exactly. And that was a nice way to work, because if you worked at DC, like let's say you were the writer, you tell me every panel and dictate to me exactly what was going to happen. They open the door, the lights on in the room, there's a reflection on the screen, and you hear that it's Iron Man calling or something. So the writer's doing all the heavy work. Then the artist has to look at that and go, oh wow, I can't draw this stuff because I got to make it all up now, because the writer imagined it first. Well, if the artist imagined it first, then the writer would take it and put the dialogue onto it, which is fun.
So when I first walked into your studio, taking that first class, you had files and files of reference material, because you wouldn't know how to draw everything, but you would need to quickly come up. You couldn't just spend your time guessing how to draw a telephone, let's say,
Or a horse.
Or a horse. And then you would have these files. I would ask you, I need to draw this, and you would pull it out, like, here you go.
Yeah.
Reference, and I would work off of that.
That was based on Wally Wood's file, because he cut off pictures from everything and put it in files, so you got everything in there. If you had to draw like a motorcycle, he would know exactly how the thing was started up. I didn't know that. I mean, you have to look at that reference. So it was funny too, because I had been working at Marvel for a year, working on with the Filipino artists, because they didn't want a pencil. So when we do like a comic book like Marvel Classics, I did a lot of those. I ghosted them, like the Arabian Nights. I drew a lot of pages in there. They didn't want to look up reference because they would stand up all day inking. In fact, there I am in my studio in 1978. That's the time I drew that Wolverine. And if you see that word contraption on the pole there, that's an artograph. There was no Xerox machine yet. So what you could do is you could put a picture on there and enlarge it, or reduce it, or reverse the image. So that was your way of getting reference larger to look at it. And Neil Adams used that, and they also used a light box, which is a contraption where it's got like a glass, and you can see, let's say you did a sketch. You put the sketch on the light box like Buscema did and Gil Kane. You put the Marvel paper or DC paper over it, and you do a tight pencil drawing. That's given to the inker.
Right, because you don't want to give an inker pencils that are full of sketchy lines, because you have to wind up erasing all that. That's extra work. It'll ruin the integrity of the paper. You won't be able to ink over it. The ink wouldn't stick to it. So you would do the rough pencils on a board. Use a light box like an animator would, and then on top of that, you would do the clean pencils on a Bristol board, and that would be sent to the inker.
That's exactly right.
Nowadays, it's all digital. So I think it's similar techniques, but just done on an iPad instead.
And here we have my pencil drawing, because I made some photocopies that had just come into existence around that time. So, and then you can see what Prez is doing now. Prez was I would say that Prez is the ultimate comic book artist over everybody, because he cared about the characters. Buscema didn't. When he drew that stuff, he didn't care if the costume was right. Neither did Gil Kane. He had to draw this stuff, but pages of it a day. So they weren't going to look up oh, what does the shield look on the back of this guy, or what is this, or how does the Hercules belt look? I did the best I could on that. Like I had looked up like how Hercules' costume was, but Prez, he must have had model sheets or something, or clipped all this stuff. So he looked at the Hercules and redrew some of the emblems on Hercules' costume.
Right, he had the lion belt buckle and
it's the
strap.
Yeah, he improved on the drawing is what he did. And the inkers, that was one of their jobs. If you were given a job at Marvel, you were supposed to fix that artwork up. So you got to get all the webbing right on Spider-Man. Somebody might have just like scribbled it in because you got to get this work out. So what we have here is Chris adding detail to my drawing. So I give him very dynamic pictures to work off of, but he put all those beautiful touches in because he loved all the characters. And there we have the art in black and white. And that's how it looked in the comic book. They didn't color it in England, they left it in black and white. And also, if you want to come over to my table and look at some of the art, I have art that's all reasonably priced. And I also have a poster that I drew special where it shows like the sign of a lion drawing in color, and every one I drew a picture of the Wolverine, so you get like original art. Those are going to be only $20. So I drew a lot of pictures of the Wolverine on this, so it's fun doing it too. Is that what we have here?
We got time. We want to talk about your time as a teacher, passing on your knowledge to.
Yeah, I did a lot of teaching. Whereas they were asking for like somebody to teach comic book drawing at Parsons to add, and I just went up there and I said I could teach that class, and they said, well, you know, are you going to be able to do this? Like they said, there's an anatomy class available too if you want to teach it. So I just went up on the blackboard and I had memorized all these like Bernard Hogarth anatomy drawings. I could see them in my head before I drew it, and I had memorized Gil King's horses. So I drew these horses, and these impossible to draw shots because I could see it in my head because I copied it so many times. So they just like hired me and said, yeah, do whatever you want in the class. So I did that for like around, I don't know, 10 years, and I also had private classes. At Wanta was one of the students there.
Yeah, and then you asked him to work on a lot of the projects you did after.
Right.
So, and then a lot of your techniques stayed with me, which I put into use to this day. So I really appreciate all the time you put in teaching all these kids and all these students over the years. What you've given to the Marvel and DC universe, and even to pioneering the self-publishing market when you were to the Outlaws. You got copies of Near to the Outlaws, right?
Yeah, it's reprinted now. I'm selling copies of the book now. It's in book form. But at one time, like almost every other new person up at Marvel came from my classes.
That's true. That's true. We did meet a lot of people through your class, a lot of Marvel folks.
Yeah, they all became artists, or one of them became an editor. Kelly Conversi, remember him?
I remember Kelly. Kelly was a great guy.
Yeah.
He would let me know. He would tell me, look, if you ever want, and this is when you could walk up to Marvel at this point, like he did. He said, if you ever want to walk around Marvel with your portfolio, just tell him at the front desk you came to see me. Sometimes his editor would be nice. But I would go in there and I would like walk around with my portfolio and ask, what do you got? If I could do anything. One time I walked in and Ron Garney, he's over here. I was hanging out with in his office with Art Adams. Just kind of talking about Jackie Chan movies.
I also gave Art Adams his first job inking. He's just a kid.
And then Ron Garney walked in. He was like, I just dropped stuff off of at the X-Men office. You got anything for me? And then Danny Fingeroff was editing Spider-Man. He's like, no, why don't you just walk over there and I'll give you something. Like, oh man, I want to be Ron Garney when I grow up. But that was that. Now, if you did not live in New York City, you had no chance of becoming a comic book artist. You needed to be in town within driving distance so they could meet you, build a rapport, become your friends. I would go to these crazy Marvel parties afterwards. It was a crazy time. But nowadays, with the advent of the internet and digital artwork, now you're competing against the whole world. So you were in at a pretty incredible time with Neil Adams, Bill Kane, Jim Steranko. You want to tell us any favorite stories from that era?
Well, it was amazing because you could actually go on a phone book and call up Wallace Wood, and he'd answer the phone. I even talked to Dicko that way. Dicko used to give me art lessons at one time. I had these.
The reclusive Steve Dicko?
Yeah. If you got on the right track with him. You know what it really was is these guys were all World War II veterans, so they liked it that I was a veteran. And also, I was pretty much a historian. You know, I'm not like, let's say, somebody now that knows everything about the Hulk, but I knew a lot of stuff, so they were like impressed. Or I would ask them an intelligent question, or they would tell me about who they were influenced by. So you got to hang around with these guys. So it was amazing. And Neil Adams was very tough with people. You'd come up there and you'd say, let me see your best drawing. He took it and ripped it in pieces in front of me. He says, go back and come back here only when you can repeat that drawing. That was a good lesson. But you know, I had been in boot camp. I had been slapped around by sergeants. That didn't mean anything. I seen guys up there like you would just like look at the work and you go make like fart sounds. The guy would like start crying. You know, these were grown guys like maybe 20 years old. I seen them make like about 3-4 guys cry.
That's on a slow day.
That's on a slow day. So you had to get on the right side of him, let's put it that way. But I got on the right side of him. He even said to one guy one time, he said, you didn't say anything during this interview. You're never going to be an artist. You have nothing to say about anything. That was pretty funny. And when he saw my work, he said he wants some advice to go back to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, because that's where I came from. He said, you're never going to make it there. And then he also took a marker and went over my drawing and put like big circles on it and ruined it. And he says, you better get used to it because that's what the editor's going to give you your work. And Wood told me that too, like they had marked up all these things, like they didn't like his, you're on one line. And it was on the All-Star Squadron. So I think we'll open up for questions.
Okay, great. Any questions?
George Perez, what point of his career did he have to work? Was he working his way up at this time? Because I'm looking at him as like one of the biggest names ever, and he was going around here very, first Wolverine story. Where was he in his career?
He was just starting out. He had been an assistant to Rich Buckler. I also worked for Buckler. Buckler was cool because he would let you work on his pages. So I would do like backgrounds or something, and Perez was doing the same thing. So what happened was, a lot of times you drop off pages and Buckler didn't want to bring them in, so Perez would bring them up there to deliver the pages. So then he would show his work to the editors. So when that Wolverine story came along, he just saw it and he said, can I ink that? And that's how he started in the business.
So he asked you?
He didn't ask me, no. Those editors made all the decisions. In fact, when I first started on Hawkman, I had talked to Dan Atkins, Klaus Jansen, and a bunch of other guys, and I had them call up the editor. And I came into the office, and then basically the editor said, what did you tell those artists to call me for? I'm the editor. I decide who's going to ink you on those books. But again, that didn't even faze me. One time I didn't know certain things, like I had a military background, but you were supposed to knock on the door before you entered. I just walked into the office and get yelled at for that. These kids, they were making all sorts of mistakes. Like one guy was eating McDonald's, he came to the office with the editor, and was pissed about that. That's disrespectful. You know? If you didn't fill out your voucher for the payment correctly, they would rip it up in front of you. Go fill it out again. Who wants to do that? You know? So you weren't really treated that nicely. Like these conventions, you're almost like treated like a god around here now. When I started at the comic conventions, there were hardly any artists coming to these shows. So you could actually make pretty good money.
Who had time? They had to work.
You had to work. You couldn't go to a comic convention.
Not only like Jack Kirby. How many pages did supposedly Jack Kirby produce in a day?
I think 6. But he was a genius. He was like a god. Same thing with John Vicente.
Same.
That's the reason he's called the king.
And meanwhile, everybody else had to struggle. What was your, how fast could you draw a page?
I could do a page a day, and that's working on it day and night. That was about it. You know, most of the guys, if you didn't look at reference and the drawing would be off, the car wouldn't look right. If you had to draw like a gun, you might have one view of the gun, so you better have a file. Like you're gonna draw a 45, you better know how that thing. I just did a drawing recently of the shadow, and I had to look up the guns for different views, because I wanted the gun pointing out like that, you know. Like, now, of course, you could stop a video, but you couldn't do that back then.
Right,
There was no
Google,
VCR.
nothing like that. You had to go through countless magazines to prepare a file for certain types of guns or horses or whatever. Now you can just Google it, or God forbid, ask AI to do something.
Now.
Any other questions?
Two questions.
Yeah.
The first one is, at the time Wolverine was like not necessarily known or the phenomenon, when did that sort of became apparent?
I think when John Byrne drew it, or I think Cochran drew it first. So somebody has to look this up historically. I don't know if you know that.
I think offhand, only because I experienced it, reading comics over time. I think it was around the Hellfire Club series, that one issue where he's in the sewers of the Hellfire Club and he's slaughtering all the innocent Hellfire soldiers that showed up for work and had nothing to do but suddenly were being involved in this crazy shortcut. I think that was it. People like short temperamental.
Well, they caught on like wildfire. Comics were changing at that time. Byrne brought in that Japanese, what is that, manga, whatever it is, style.
Oh, with the big eyes.
Yeah, and he also crossed Neil Adams into that. You know.
Yeah.
So that became like a hit series, and then Terry Austin's Crazy Inky. It was amazing.
And then of course Frank Miller took the character, added
Yeah, that was way later.
his twist to it, which he has been dethroned as the first solo artist.
Did you know at the time?
I didn't know anything at the time.
That this guy was going to be as big as he was? As he is?
No. He was just like another baker up there. Hoping to get a break at Marvel. That's what it was.
One thing I'm wondering is when Wolverine was first designed by Len Wein and copyright, the claws are supposed to be part of the costume. It wasn't established later on that they were a physical part of his body. I'm wondering if that was the first time somebody drew his claws coming out of his. Well, he's wearing Mickey Mouse gloves here.
Yeah.
But maybe
Well, I also
it
could have
established it was like part of his anatomy.
I don't think that was in the comics yet. They just had that in the story. Like, I didn't even know what he was talking about. Like, Shooter said, make sure that the claws come out of his gloves. And they didn't tell me how Wolverine was dressed. What I did is I gave him one of those, like, lumberjack suits. And then there was a company out at the time called Members Only. So I looked at that for the jacket, but I sort of made it more like a leather jacket.
So you gave him his plaid
Yeah.
lumberjack look. You invented that part too.
Right.
You should that Marvel's letter should have been longer.
It might be corrected. Let's see. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned having assistants and apprentices. Like, generally, what are the responsibilities that an assistant or apprentice has for a board?
Well, I'll start it with it and then he can continue. I begged Ron Wilson if I could assist him. I said, listen, I don't even charge you, but there was a scene in the Luke Cage Hero for Hire, Power Man, what this was called. And he was going to be in a hospital. So I had a hospital file. I had cut up the EC comics, and they had hospital scenes. And I said, let me pencil the backgrounds, because I wanted to see what the stuff would look like in print. You know what I mean? So that was one way we'd like offer to help.
A background or something?
Yes, because they didn't want to draw that. It was a waste of time. Or I remember there was a couple shots in there of a car, and he was stepping on this, to make it run. So you had to look that up. There was a shot in there where a car that was thrown somewhere upside down, so I looked that up. And also, like with Buckler, he would let me pencil backgrounds on a Batman story, for instance. That blew my mind because there it's all in print the next month, inked. And I had given my name in all the panels, like it'll say like Landgraf Art Supplies. And
So, like I said, I showed up for his class, and then I must have impressed him so much, he asked me to stay and work for him for a bag of potato chips and a can of Pepsi. He was working on the New York City Outlaws at that time, and other indie books, like rock and roll, revolutionary comics. So he would do, of course, the main characters. I would take the page and fill in the background or fill in some inks, like the large black areas, like that. I was seeing my name in there too. And then I moved on and I worked for other artists, Billy Tucci, who's here now. I worked with him at Crusade Comics. My artwork is in his omnibus, pretty the best drawn trees you will see in any comic book. Moved on to do that. So basically that's it. Like the apprentice is to help assist the artist complete his job so he can get paid. You learn through osmosis, supposedly, how to draw and lay out a book and the process behind it, and then hopefully work your way up into having your own comic book. It's a very highly competitive field, almost as much as, let's say, rock and roll. Everybody wants to be the lead singer or the lead guitarist. Sometimes you just wind up being the bass player. Like assistant with the drummers, that's why I put drummers in a higher regard. They're more like the colors. But yeah, they're that's how the system had worked. Frank Frazetta had been Al Cap's assistant on Little Abner for many years. Jack Kirby, Joe Simon. It was always something that there was a kind of a higher that you had to work your way up to.
Well, that was the only way you could learn. Like Juan had said, there really was no schools. The Kubert School didn't exist. So, I mean, it was like a strange time. In a way, it was better because you could kind of like meet those actual master comic artists that were alive still. And you didn't have to go online with like 3,000 other artists and show your portfolio to some editor at a comic convention. That's how Bagley got it. In fact, Mark Bagley, I was reading an interview with him yesterday, and he had won that Marvel trial book contest.
I remember that. I was very jealous.
Well, they were supposed to give him work, and they forgot about him. So they didn't give him work for a year and a half. So he got a regular job at Aircraft Center doing something. And then Shooter came to a convention. He said, I never got to draw a story for Marvel. I won that contest. So then they gave him some work. We eventually got to be Spider-Man artist.
Doing it for 40 years now. The line goes around the arena. Ice skating. It's cold enough.
Yeah. So what time you got? So what time?
I've got 10:40.
10:12?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're supposed to end it then.
Okay. So, any other questions? One more question? All right.
Well, thanks for coming, everybody. We appreciate it. Stop on the table.